What's going on, people? My name is Batman, and today I want to talk about what Visceral Games can do to diversify and intensify its Battlefield Hardline multiplayer formula to fully utilize the unique set of experiences it has to offer and put this game on the kind of steroids that will make it more than an 8-month-long franchise placeholder whose primary purpose is boosting cash flow and interest before Battlefront drops. I want to talk about what Hardline needs to do to become a defining FPS experience that leaves its mark in the memories and hearts of its players, on the franchise itself and the entire FPS genre as a whole. As early as the original Hardline beta almost a year ago, I knew this game was designed to peel off players from the COD player base. I've always known that the primary goal of this particular multiplayer formula was to provide a super fast-paced, simpler, much lower TTK, infantry-based gameplay experience when compared to past Battlefields. A kind of experience that would hold many of the same appeals as the traditional COD formula. Now, I haven't been as upset about this as I would be with other franchises trying to implement their own version of COD, because I'm fairly confident that this doesn't signal a trend or general shift in what Battlefield is going to be in the future. I don't think it's an evolution of the standard Battlefield formula that future Battlefield formulas will continue to evolve on in the way we've seen the last 3 Halo games sort of build off the evolution of their most recent entries, right? Reach had the sprint as an ability, Halo 4 made it universal, Halo 5 makes it universal and unlimited. I can't imagine that's how it's going to go down with Battlefield. I know tanks, heavy vehicles, and destruction have a future in Battlefield. Because if we look at Battlefront, which I consider sort of a sci-fi entry into the Battlefield series, and I know it pisses some people off when I say that for some reason, I'm not sure why, but suffice it to say Battlefront is 32v32, large-scale warfare on the Frostbite engine built by the same devs who made Battlefield 4. Obviously, it's not going to just be a reskin. I'm sure it will have its own mechanics and what have you, but the core fundamentals of its formula will be very similar to Battlefield 4, just like the core fundamentals of the original Battlefront games were almost identical to that of original Battlefields. If you put the original first 2 Star Wars Battlefront games, you could play them in first person. That was an option in the settings. You could switch to first person. You switch those games to first person, they were reskins of the early Battlefields, period. And anyone who's played both franchises in the past will tell you that. And we know they're already emphasizing Hoth in this coming Battlefront. In the only trailer they've released, in the brief footage we saw at last year's E3, we saw asset models for the AT-STs and AT-ATs, and that means heavy vehicle warfare will return. And in fact, part of the reason I suspect Hardline had to be so different in its general gameplay style and infantry-based emphasis this time around was because Battlefront is going to be coming out less than a year later. Right? We're talking, 6-7 months down the road, we're going to have Battlefront out, and that's going to be by EA, and they're going to be trying to push that. And they don't want redundancy, because redundancy hurts sales. Like, if Hardline was just another iteration of Battlefield 4, which was an iteration of Battlefield 3, it could hurt Battlefront sales, simply because, not everyone would feel the need to drop $60 to get in a snowspeeder on Hoth, when they're still having a bunch of fun with the Little Bird on Operation Wideout, which is just Hoth with some different infrastructure. That's a big part of the reason I suspect Hardline had to be different, and why I don't think it signals a shift in the entire formula for future games to come. I'm confident the traditional Battlefield formula most series veterans, including myself, love and feel is missing in Hardline will return in Battlefront in some form, and especially and also in future Battlefields. For one, because the EA CEO has already confirmed in an interview preceding the release of Hardline that Battlefield is returning to its military roots in the next Battlefield game, and I think he felt the need to make that clear in that interview, specifically to keep series veterans from worrying that the Hardline format was the new norm, or the new direction of the series as a whole. And realistically, I don't see how they can return to a military format without including heavy vehicle combat and the other stuff that defined the traditional BF formula that is not in Hardline. And also, just because I think it's clear based on what sales and pre-order data we have seen, just the fact that it had to get pushed back to a March release date in the first place, because originally, you'll recall, it was going to be released in the fall alongside Advanced Warfare and all that. I think that signals that, Hardline isn't super popular among the veteran Battlefield community and isn't necessarily pulling in the same kinds of profits as Battlefield 4. But I think their intentions with Hardline were more than simply raking in max profits this year. Hardline isn't a spin-off, but it's obviously a very different entry in the series, designed to appeal to a very different type of player for very different reasons. And if we're going to discuss what kind of modifications and changes should be made to make the game better, we have to first ask what were EA's goals with it in the first place. Because obviously, if I ask what would make Hardline better, plenty of series veterans are going to say something like, in the next update, they should put some fucking Abrams tanks in that bitch and more destruction. But I don't think that's a realistic expectation, because I think their primary goal is to attract COD players. Their marketing strategy has always been to peel off COD players. This goes back to Battlefield 3, when their marketing tagline was above and beyond the call. right? As in above and beyond the Call of Duty. It wasn't even that subtle. My best guess is that Hardline and its future sequels, or future BF entries that adopt a similar formula, are supposed to bring the COD players in, and then if they get comfortable on Hardline, it will be much easier for these players to make the transition to the more traditional Battlefield multiplayer formula we've seen in the past. It's no big secret that it's a lot easier to sell a sequel to someone who's already vested in your franchise, that already has knowledge of how the game works, that has fond memories on the game, that is involved in the online communities, on Reddit and such. Hardline can hook COD players and act as a safe middleman between COD and Battlefield, a bridge between the two formulas. Because making the jump from Call of Duty to Battlefield 4 can be difficult for a more casual player, right? I mean, not only are you dealing with a much higher time to kill, way more recoil, bullet drop, destructible environments that are constantly evolving in real time around you in unexpected and varying ways, but you also have to overcome a huge learning curve that includes the detailed and complex intricacies of setting up your infantry and vehicle loadouts and understanding their strengths and weaknesses and what situations require what maneuvers and what customization options make those maneuvers work, right? The Battlefield 4 tank by itself had a steeper learning curve and wider skill gap than the entirety of any single COD game. COD has the foregrip. Battlefield has the stubby potato, angled, ergo, and vertical grips. That's fairly representative of how much more shit you have to learn in general to be good in Battlefield as opposed to Call of Duty or even most other FPS multiplayer games in general. So Hardline is an environment where a COD player, or just a typical casual gamer, will be comfortable in the same casual friendly environment with a fast-paced low TTK simpler atmosphere and learn a lot of the basics about what roles the different classes play, how a lot of the different attachments and gadgets work and can be used together, managing an actual significant amount of recoil with bullet drop and having to lead your bullets. And then with those skills developed, moving on to a more complex title with all the intricacies of vehicular warfare and a more thorough amount of destruction won't be as difficult or intimidating. And that's really what I suspect the marketing strategy is behind this game, and frankly, it's a marketing strategy that I hope succeeds, because it's time for Battlefield to destroy the abomination that is Call of Duty. This is something I've wanted and openly advocated in favor of for quite some time now. Battlefield 4 could have done it. Battlefield 4 had this rare opportunity last year when COD had released its shittiest entry in the history of its franchise, Ghosts, while Battlefield was finally able to run 60 frames per second, 1080p, 32v32 on the consoles. It should have beaten COD then and there, but it didn't because the only thing worse than Ghosts was the Battlefield 4 launch. Call of Duty is a cancer on the FPS genre. So long as it is at the top, so long as it has the highest market share, every other FPS will continue to emulate it, to import its ideas and formula in an attempt to peel off or cut into that market share. Call of Duty is what killed Halo 4, kill streaks and universal sprint and customizable classes. These things weren't an attempt to modernize Halo, they were an attempt to CODize Halo. What I suspect these publishers and developers are doing is going to the focus groups. If you ever hear about those investor calls that are always making the news, because that's where we usually hear big announcements like, you know, what the next Call of Duty is going to be or whatever, they almost always talk about consumer index research. That's what they call it. And usually this consumer index research plays a big role in every game's development. And you've probably seen this in TV shows or what have you before where, you know, there's like a group of potential customers in a room and they get polled and asked questions and there's like a one-way mirror on the wall and the Mad Men guys are on the other side. I mean, not exactly like that, but you get the idea. And I know exactly what they're hearing. They ask these kids what they like so much about Call of Duty, but the trick is half these kids don't even know what it is they really like in Call of Duty, because what they really like is that it makes them feel like a badass no matter how untalented they really are. But they don't realize that, and even if they do on some subconscious level, their flawed psychology isn't going to let them consciously acknowledge it anyways. So they say, well, I like the kill streaks and customizable classes in COD. So 343 says, hey, let's put that shit in Halo, it'll bring COD players in, but of course it doesn't. And those of us who wanted a real Halo game get screwed, and the game itself ultimately flops. Think about how many games we've seen gradually implement COD-style mechanics and then flop. Medal of Honor is another great example of EA trying to, you know, create a Battlefield COD hybrid. The game flopped. I don't know how Halo 5 will be received. I think its beta stats portend a dark future, but if it does suck, it'll be because of COD. It'll be because they implemented COD mechanics and once again it didn't work, just like most other games who have tried to follow that line of thinking. So long as COD is on top, that's what everyone is going to copy. which sucks ass because the entire appeal and premise of COD's success is not at all the diversity or intensity of its experiences, nor is it the ingenuity or novelty of its gameplay, the beauty of its artistic achievement, but only its ability to trick people into thinking they are badass even when they aren't, by using cheap tricks to evoke strong chemical reactions from the rewards and incentive circuits in their brains. If games were ice cream flavors, it's like we used to have 3 different flavors with Halo, Battlefield, and Call of Duty: chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry. COD is strawberry because strawberry fucking sucks. I'm so tired of people trying to stick fruits in my sweets. It completely defeats the purpose of sweets in the first place. Like carrot cake? What the fuck is that nasty ass shit? But as each game moves closer and closer to the COD formula, it's like we have 3 different versions of fruit ice cream. Strawberry, strawberry sherbet, strawberry with blueberries in it. Our options are being restricted. The diversity and uniqueness of the games we love is being stamped out by greed, a lack of developer creativity, a lack of publisher balls, and sheer incompetence. Incompetence because nobody seems to recognize that Call of Duty's formula is in decay. It is obviously nowhere near as viable as it once was. Even with the exosuits, which I freely admit were a fun addition, it still has to hide its population counts. In fact, I would bet the only reason COD is still on top is because of a mixture of its brand recognition and the intense media coverage it gets because of that brand recognition, and then of course the media coverage drives more brand recognition, and it's a wonderful cycle. But it's a cycle that has propped up a flawed formula and a pathetic gaming experience for far too long, at the cost of the genre and the entire industry. Now, Battlefield Hardline, as I talked about, has undoubtedly followed suit in some ways with this game. Hardline is, in my eyes, the closest to Call of Duty that Battlefield has ever been. If you gotta fight fire with fire to slay the beast, then so be it, as long as it doesn't continue in Battlefront or future Battlefields. If it continues in Battlefront, if for any reason I am not fucking blown away by Battlefront, I will quit video games. I'm not joking. I will stop playing video games and I'll probably start talking about politics on this channel, which if you didn't know, I'm like 100 times more obsessed with than video games. But I'm confident it won't continue. I think Battlefield 4 could have beaten COD. I think they know that. If not for that awful shoot yourself in the fucking foot launch, and perhaps with some stronger brand recognition among the mainstream casual FPS audience, recognition which it now has thanks to Battlefield 4, and of course Battlefront not only has 2 wildly successful shooters in the past that have strong emotional bonds to many of our childhoods, but it's also fucking Star Wars and has been defining kids' childhoods for 40 years. For the first time since Halo 3, a shooter is about to go toe-to-toe with Call of Duty. And I know that both DICE and EA are aware that they can't simply copy COD to beat it. Presently, they are still running Battlefest double XP events on Battlefield 4, even though Hardline is out. Battlefield 4 is going to get its own free DLC, including new guns and such. It's not just some trivial ass camo shit, like real DLC is coming. They are supporting Battlefield 4 and Hardline simultaneously, which means they are well aware that a significant chunk of the Battlefield base, the series veterans of the Battlefield population, has chosen to remain on Battlefield 4 instead of moving on to Hardline. They know they cannot hold on to the player base they already have if they move closer and closer to COD, so instead they are using Hardline to move COD players closer to Battlefield by overcoming the one obstacle that holds Battlefield back from crushing COD like the worthless toad that it is, and that is the learning curve and the skill gap. Battlefront can beat COD this year, and if Hardline aids that effort, then so be it, because at the end of the day it has to be Battlefront or Battlefield that slays COD. No other game is positioned to do it. No other game has the brand recognition or is as popular. No other game has the financial backing. No other game has an FPS format similar enough. Halo's stuck on one console. It has to be Battlefield or Battlefront. It has to be a BF title, a BF acronymed title. Now, on a side note, I hope you don't worry that this may affect my coverage of these franchises. I am openly biased, but at least I'm open about it. And, to be fair, I have given Call of Duty credit for the exosuit, and if this next COD, be it Black Ops 3 or World at War 2 or whatever, if it should change in positive ways, I'll give credit where credit is due, and I've never hesitated to tear Battlefield a new one either. It's just that I only had 1,000 subs when Battlefield 4 launched, so most of you haven't had the opportunity to see me rage about Battlefield, but I tore into them. I said they had to have known that it was broken. I supported the several lawsuits filed against them by their investors because of that launch. And I wasn't nice about Hardline at first, as you'll recall, either, because I felt its formula was moving way too close to Call of Duty's. And I've only relented on that criticism because of the many changes they made following that original beta, because a lot of people shared the criticisms which I did following that original beta, the one way back in the day. Not the beta right before release, the one like a year ago that was, I believe, PC only. But they pulled back some of the Call of Duty stuff, like making it so that second chance only works if you're hit by a car or an explosion, whereas in that original beta, it was just a clone of the second chance we've seen in Call of Duty, which is itself another perfect example of the line that Battlefield can't cross. Hardline is as close to COD as Battlefield will ever be. And they wanted it to be closer originally, but concluded they couldn't do it without alienating people like me. And that's why they had to take out second chance. You know, they've already had to sort of take a few steps back from that line. I think they know where that line is, and that's why I'm not worried about the long-term trajectory of the franchise based on Hardline's COD-friendly formula that I know has alienated a lot of veterans. Because based on their actions, I know that they are boxed in. And that's also another good example of developers finding out the hard way that COD's mechanics aren't necessarily going to fly in other games. They were trying to run second chance even after COD itself had abandoned second chance. Why doesn't anyone realize that Call of Duty's success at this point is only smoke and mirrors? Magic tricks that they should stop trying to imitate because the audience has caught on and is now in on the joke, and it's not funny. If StarWars Battlefront or Battlefield were the top game with the highest market share, the FPS genre would be a better place, because instead of trying to simplify and prey on the worst parts of our psychology, games would be trying to implement their own mechanics that are as exciting, interesting, and diverse as the destructible environments, class loadouts, attachments, and gadgets, vehicular warfare, and 32v32 strategy that makes Battlefront and Battlefield games so awesome. Developers would feel pressured to emulate innovative, experience-driven gameplay as opposed to the hollow, soulless formula that is the Call of Duty parasite. So if Hardline is the tip of the spear in this battle, what can be done to make that pointy end even sharper? Presently, Visceral has succeeded in providing a casual-friendly environment. It has addicting, fast-paced gameplay, it has plenty of edge-of-your-seat moments, but based on my super scientific but not really assessment, drawing from extensive amounts of research conducted on various forums, including the Hardline subreddit, the Hardline Facebook, various YouTube comment sections, including my own, and in-depth discussions with a close-knit group of friends who are all die-hard Battlefield veterans, and simply based on the fact that such a large portion of the player base stayed on Battlefield 4, I have concluded that Hardline is coming up short in its appeal to experience-driven gameplay preferences. There needs to be a wider range of interesting and unique things to do that are consistently available more often. And the truth is, Hardline does have its own experiences to offer that haven't been in any previous FPS I can think of. It's just that it needs to do more to make these experiences consistently viable options. Hardline is like a great 3D movie, but they are struggling to make sure everyone in the audience gets the 3D glasses, and that those 3D glasses are working properly. The awesome experience is there. The mechanism for attaining said experience consistently is somewhat faulty. But that's something, in my eyes, that can be easily remedied, easily repaired, through changes meaningful enough to maximize, diversify, and intensify the quantity and quality of experiences, but changes that are still simplistic enough to be implemented through patches, updates, and DLC. And I now submit my thoughts and speculative suggestions to the public domain in hopes that some of them may achieve wider notoriety and perhaps work their way up to the powers that be for implementation. And we can, all of us, aid in the effort of destroying the Call of Duty abomination once and for all. For starters, Visceral needs to enhance the capabilities of vehicular gameplay. Presently, most of the vehicles in Hardline feel like death traps most of the time. The sports cars, even the heavily armored SUVs with mounted turrets, are used primarily as quick transportation from point A to point B. They are generally abandoned at the first sign of battle and are rarely used in a meaningful way to engage in combat. This is because it is way too easy for a single infantry unit to decimate the occupants of almost any vehicle, for a number of reasons, and because of this, vehicles are rarely used in combat situations outside of Hotwire. But we know that the vehicle gameplay can be a lot of fun because it is a lot of fun in Hotwire. It just needs to be a consistently viable option in other game modes too. And there are a number of changes they could make to solve this problem. For starters, all cars, vans, and trucks should have tinted windows. This will make it harder and less common for infantry units to simply and instantly headshot the vehicle's essentially coverless and helpless occupants. Infantry units will have to guess which seats are occupied and won't be able to as easily pinpoint said occupants' heads. Presently, if you're in a vehicle, it's the equivalent of standing out in the open without any cover, and the vehicle itself makes it so that everyone will notice you, and because you can't move, you are a very easy headshot. Tinted windows wouldn't solve the problem entirely, but they would make vehicles less of a guaranteed instant death trap. The chassis armor upgrade, presently available as a customizable option to all automobiles, should include bulletproof glass. It shouldn't make the glass invincible, but it should give it a higher damage threshold so that you have to break through its armor before you can start hitting the guy on the inside. This means that vehicle passengers won't just get instantly killed by some guy hiding in the bushes when they drive by briefly. It also means that if someone does start shooting at the car, the vehicle driver has the opportunity to react and take defensive measures or begin evasive maneuvers before he instantly loses everyone in the car. I think all automobiles in general should receive a slight armor buff to their vanilla chassis. Players should be able to store ammo and health crates inside the trunk of a vehicle. So like how you open the trunk to take out the rocket launcher or whatever, you could also stick stuff in that trunk. Right now you can actually put ammo and health crates on the car and they'll stick to it, and this way your team has health and ammo regeneration while they're in the car, which makes it a much more effective fighting force. But the problem is anytime you take damage of any sort, it blows up the crates and you have to put them back on. What would be cool is if the trunk interior would keep them protected and make it a more viable option. Medics should be able to revive people in the car, so like if the guy next to you dies, you can revive him without anyone having to get out of the car. Drivers should be able to use pistols or other one-handed weapons and shoot out their window with hipfire crosshairs. Passengers should be able to repair inside the armored SUV. Not the control and command center and that light tank thing, but those SUVs that have the mounted turret with the guy sticking half his body out the top. First of all, the guy operating the turret should have less of his body sticking out, maybe a third as opposed to half, because right now that turret is an all-time death trap. He should also have the option to duck back in the car, kind of like how passengers can hang out the window or duck back in the car for safety, and then passengers in that SUV should be able to repair the SUV turret thing. I think they aren't allowing people to repair it because it would be overpowered, but I don't think it would be overpowered if you could repair that car, because, I mean, it gets its shit fucked up pretty often. The helicopters should have radios too. The radio should be able to play the Hardline main menu theme, which I really like. I think it's the coolest main menu theme I've ever heard. The song should not be resetting every time someone enters or leaves the vehicle, and you should be able to hold B to select the song you want from a drop-down menu of some sort. The transport heli pilot should get more points every time someone spawns on the heli and more points every time someone exits it, and double points if they exit the heli over enemy territory or within a certain range of the objective. The passenger in the heli, you know, that seat right next to the pilot that has no practical use, you're just sort of looking out the front windshield. I think if you spot someone from that seat, they should stay spotted until death, right? Because your spot can track them for a while longer because you're in the motherfucking sky or whatever. That would make that seat useful and make it kind of cool. You know, fun to be in, just chill in there and spot people, and you'd be helping out the team, you know, get some points for that. These changes will make vehicles a more consistently useful and potent force in combat, diversifying and intensifying the overall combat experience in-game. Now, another area where Hardline has a lot to offer but is having trouble connecting with players is in its game modes. Hardline brought many new game modes to the table, but they need to be fine-tuned and tweaked in significant ways to capitalize on the fresh scenarios it's offering. Hotwire should spawn everyone in a vehicle. They can exit the vehicle and move around the map freely if they would like, but everyone should always have to spawn in a vehicle. This would increase the intensity of the matches, and this would also solve what I consider a big problem in Hotwire, which is that a lot of the time one team monopolizes all the capture points, and because a huge portion of the enemy team is running around as infantry, they are basically incapable of stopping the other team's momentum, and the game is over much too quickly. Vehicle respawn should be instant in this game mode, and to cut back on the amount of pickup weapon spam from people always having shit in their trunks, maybe just increase the amount of motorcycles available. Everyone gets to spawn on a motorcycle, but players have to always spawn in on a vehicle, and they aren't allowed to spawn in on their squad mates if their squad mates aren't in a vehicle. There should also be some helicopters that serve as control flag points. That would be cool. The oil tanker should always be worth double points because it's so slow and so hazardous to its occupants. In Blood Money, it'd be really cool if you could drive around the armored van that your cash pile is in and then make it so that the vehicle can be disabled to where it can't move but never fully destroyed, so then the teams have to fight to control it and then repair it and get it away. That would make that game mode so much more intense and would add a brutal layer of vehicular combat and high-speed chases as well. Also, does it have to always be money that we're stealing? Like, what if we were also sometimes stealing drugs or like expensive jewelry or widescreen TVs or like illegally harvested organs? That would be sick. Also, Blood Money should be 32v32. I say embrace the clusterfuck. And if someone is holding a certain amount of cash, I think it should put a symbol over their head for everyone to see, like in Heist or Headhunter from Halo Reach. Right now, it seems like it's pretty often that players are traveling from their spawn, stealing the enemy's money, and getting back to their spawn without ever having to get into a combat situation. Enemies are like driving right by one another, each one with a huge pile of cash, but like each trying to run away so they don't fight. And when you're trying to hunt people carrying money, it can be pretty difficult to find them, and a lot of people just end up camping one of the 3 cash piles, which is boring and seemingly defeats the purpose of the entire game mode. This is what I'm talking about when I say there's great experiences to be offered, they're just not being capitalized on, because instead of, people chasing everyone around, it's almost like people are camping 3 flags in domination, you know what I mean? Now, Rescue and Crosshair, I think these games should be 16v16. This isn't Call of Duty. 5v5 is boring as shit. Or they could keep Rescue as a 5v5 game mode, but do more to emphasize stealth-based gameplay. Like right now it's mostly just treated as a no respawn TDM, which gets dull fast. I was thinking like the rescuing team members are allowed to respawn until a majority of their team has been spotted. Once 3 out of the 5 members of the team have been spotted, they can no longer respawn. So then everyone is like sneaking around trying to be all stealthy about it instead of just ramboing in and trying to kill the bad guys. Crosshair should be 16v16, and it should be changed dramatically. Right now, its gameplay is basically identical to that of Rescue, even when people do play the objective. What would be sick is if they kept it a no respawn game, but the VIP spawned in like an armored motorized escort at the beginning, right? So the defending team gets a couple vehicles, and the VIP gets to choose which vehicle he wants to be in, and they have to get to somewhere on the opposite side of the map, and the people trying to kill the VIP get to spawn in like 15 seconds earlier, what have you, so they can set up positions to attack the escort, and then the VIP defenders can get creative with it. They can abandon the vehicle or drive vehicles in different directions. He can exit the vehicle whenever he wants. Maybe they use the vehicles as a decoy and the VIP tries to sneak through the buildings or whatever. And respawning is still off, so it gets really intense and goes right down to the wire, but that would be so much more interesting than the current gameplay, which basically just turns into TDM every time. And lastly, outside of these things, in a more general sense, respawn time should be reduced across the board. You're dying a lot more and a lot faster in this game than past Battlefields. I think the respawn time should reflect that. Presently, after staring at your killer for 5 seconds, you have to wait another 5 seconds on the map screen. If they cut that second 5 seconds down to like 2 seconds, I think that would be much more appropriate. Vehicle physics need to be modernized. They have the same physics in Battlefield 4, but vehicles are being utilized in a much different way now. I think if they were more similar to something like the Warthog from Halo, that would be a lot of fun and a much more responsive experience. Customization options should be increased tenfold, especially since we have to look at the person who killed us every time for so long. And because there's a lot of creative directions they could go with this game being sort of silly, but I should be able to put on like a Batman suit, or if I want to look like Hank from Breaking Bad, or if I want to look like militarized police in Ferguson, there should be a much wider range of options, and the same goes for vehicles. I want to put fucking flames and shit on my car, and neon lights, and blue tinted windows, and cool bumper stickers and shit, and decals, and golden fucking rims, and I want a bedazzled grill for my mouth, and a chain that hangs so low it wobbles to and fro. All of these things, the changes to the vehicles, to the game modes, and whatever else can be done via updates and patches and DLC. It will go a long ways towards intensifying and diversifying the combat and Battlefield Hardline multiplayer, which will make it that much more effective at accomplishing its goals and aiding in the epic struggle to destroy Call of Duty once and for all and bring balance to the Force. Please be sure to rate the video if you enjoyed it, and the For the Win query of the day is, do you like Battlefield 4 or Battlefield Hardline more, and why? This is Batman, signing out.